Action.
Well, thanks, and welcome to this presentation and discussion of Christian Zionism and disciples. I'm Rick Stagenborg. I'm part of the Disciples Palestine Solidarity Movement, and we are disciples around the country who are working to educate and mobilize disciples and other interested people in faith uh, into supporting the Palestinian cause. We're going to have a slightly different sort of program today. We're going to have two 10-minute presentations followed by small group discussions for a total of about an hour and 15 minutes. And our presenters today will be Marcy Mazza-Fredley and Reverend Terry Nilsson Baird. We'll be talking about the history and theology of Christian Zionism, how it manifests in the Disciples Church, and how we should respond. I believe that's all I was going to cover.
All right, and without further ado, Terry, we will send it to you. Are you ready to share? I'm trying to figure out if I can.
Figure out whether, yeah, okay.
I
I think so.
I might have to I'm gonna unpin you just so you can for sure share. There we go. Okay.
A lot of people are just now learning the term Christian Zionism, but it's actually very old. Back when the Puritans came over, one of the first things that they were teaching people was about the needed restoration of the Jews to the Holy Land. And at that point in time, it was called Restorationism. And so the term Christian Zionism is actually very new. Let me see if I can get to my notes, which I probably cannot. Okay. I'm going to move the screen over a little bit. The idea of Zionism, and I don't know how familiar you all are with it, but it's European in nature. The Jews who were living in the area of Palestine were part of the Ottoman Empire, and they were not what I would call Zionist at the time. Everyone lived together, got along very well. They had their own separate towns in many cases, but they traded back and forth between each other. And when they didn't have separate towns, they were neighbors, and they did neighborly things with each other. The conflict itself is not old. This is just a little history on this, and we have the PDF of the slides if you want to do some more reading. Hitler's Holocaust was a racist genocide, and it's been responded to by more and more racist genocides. The native people were replaced, resulting in the Nakba. But in the US, fundamentalist Christianity was rising. My thought is that that was probably a result of the Second World War and the fear that people experienced. I can remember my dad's mother talking about how they had to turn off all the lights when they were afraid that someone was bombing the city. This form of Christianity then focuses on what is necessary for the return of Jesus. But the Christian Zionism assigns enemies and allies in the cause. The focus of Christian Zionism is to bring Jesus back to judge the world. Calvin originally came up with the idea, well, not originally, it was already being discussed in some theological circles. The Eastern Church was not part of that. The Catholic Church was not part of that, but the Protestant Church became part of that. The idea that we as Protestants could become elect if we chose to bless the Jews and advocate for their return to their homeland. Christian Zionism requires a literal reading of Scripture, particularly the Torah, because that is what they use to justify the first 5 books of the Bible, to justify bringing the Jews back to their original homeland. And they say God gave the descendants of Abraham the land. Years ago, I was preparing for candidacy in the United Methodist Church, and someone from my own home congregation who was on the committee to support me said, "You're wrong about this." She said, "My daughter married a Jewish man, and God gave them that land." And it was kind of shocking to me to hear that expressed so clearly and so stridently. And I was wondering then about, since God gave the descendants of Abraham the land, and Abraham had two sons, Isaac and Ishmael, only the lineage of Isaac counts in this worldview. The lineage of Ishmael does not. The Palestinian people do not. The scripture that says, "I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you," is used by Christian Zionists as a reason to support whatever Israel does. And this has been, folks, in our churches for a long, long time. It's a misreading of the scripture. But many people who quote this do not even know that there are Christian communities that are in Palestine. And they're often surprised to learn this. Sorry, if you have my camera up, you will see that I'm under cat at the moment. Christian Zionism is an attempt essentially to graft themselves onto the concept of chosen people. I would say, again, especially for their own salvation. But it's both a theological and a political movement. It was concentrated in the US, but it wasn't of real big fame in the early years of the country until we got a little visit from Mr. John Nelson Darby. Darby is in many ways the bane of my existence and the subject of my doctorate work. He was an Irish attorney, and he came up with this idea as he was pastoring a very small church, that the Bible just meant what it said, and that it was meant to be read literally. This led to some frontier religion here, because he was laughed out of Ireland when he offered his ideas. And so he came to the US to spread his wisdom. And he found himself on the frontier because they were the only folks who would listen to him, because there weren't very many pastors and educated clergy on the frontier. So that led to unhappy cats. That led to the fundamentalism of basically the territories of the US before they incorporated as states. That in turn led to the Scofield Bible. The Scofield Bible has notes in the margin about exactly how you're supposed to read this. I'm sorry, I have to put a cat down. Okay, sorry. And so people have gotten they've gotten some bad information about what scripture means and how it's to be read. And thinking of the people who authored the Bible as the only people that God loved has become problematic in our own foreign policy. That's also a subject of my work. Christian Zionism is concentrated in the US, but it has spread to other countries because of our missionaries. And so you'll find a great deal of it in the continent of Africa, in the countries that we've sent missionaries to. As far as political influence, we've got our friends from the American Committee for Palestine, APAC, or I'm sorry, I should know the translation of this, and I can't see my notes from this. But APAC and the Christians United for Israel they lobby our foreign policy to support Israel but not Palestine, based on an eschatological destiny idea. The idea that all Jews must return to the Holy Land and accept Christ before his return so that they can avoid eternal damnation. And it's actually an anti-Jewish idea, which goes as far back as in writing as the Geneva Bible in the 1500s. It's a large reason for US foreign policy, as those organizations steer large voting blocks, and how what people learn in church influences what they believe in their worldview and what they believe in their commitment to what they think is traditional Christianity. They believe that the founding of the State of Israel in 1948 was a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And they go through and they, try to pick and choose some scriptures that validate this worldview. So I put part of a suggested reading list on here. With God on Our Side is a movie that came out in 2011. And I actually watched it again this morning just to see if I needed to incorporate anything new into this. There's a number of places that you can watch it. Just Google that. And if you've got, I think one of them was Tubi. I happen to have Amazon Prime Video, so I watched it on that and then I bought a copy. A book called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pappé. Elias Shakur's We Belong to the Land. Father Shakur is a Orthodox priest in the Galilee, and he has a school that he runs called Mar Elias. Embracing Israel and Palestine, Rabbi Michael Lerner. He was one of the first people that I was learning some of this from 20 years ago. And I can't remember exactly, but I believe he's deceased now. But the book is still available. A new one, When the World Sleeps, by Francesca Albanese, who used to be the UN Special Rapporteur in the Holy Land, until the US demanded her replacement last year because they didn't like that she was being fair to the Palestinians. A friend of mine, Nora Ericott's book, Justice for Some. Another friend, Stephen Sizer, Christian Zionism, The Roadmap to Armageddon. A couple new ones, Christ in the Rubble, Faith, the Bible, and Genocide in Gaza by Munther Isaac, who's the pastor of the Bethlehem Christmas Church. And Being Christian After the Desolation of Gaza, which was edited by Fisk and Wagner. This will all be in the PDF that Rebecca has. And finally, if you have particular questions or objections to what I say, my email address is on the last page. Did I make my 15 minutes, Rebecca?
Oh, so you have time. So
okay. One interesting thing to do is to look at Wikipedia. First, look at Christian Zionism, and then you'll start to see the references to not Reconstructionism.
Restorationism. Do you want to
Thank you.
you want to unshare your slides now so we
I can do that.
That'd be great.
I have a little brain damage, and it's caused by a spinal fluid leak, and it dreadfully affects my memory at times. So that's why it was important for me to be able to see my notes, because I didn't print them out and I couldn't see them. But Wikipedia actually does a pretty good job of going into this. But then when they refer you to the restorationism, it's really important to follow that link, because that goes farther back than the Geneva Bible. And it talks about some of the very early church fathers that even suggested this after the expulsion of the Jews from the Holy Land during the Roman Empire. But again, good work there, some good links to some reading materials, some articles, and stuff that'll definitely be making its way into my work. I got involved in this whole thing in about 2003 when I read the story of Rachel Corrie. I have, as many of us have, met her parents, and it just affected me so dramatically, because it wasn't how I understood things to be. And so I started digging into it. And for 20 years, I have really made, I have a library that you wouldn't believe.
Mm. Terry, for those who are not familiar with the name, do you want to just briefly explain the story of Rachel Corrie?
Sure. Rachel was a young woman who went to do not really a mission trip, but I think she was working for American Friends Service Committee at the time. I can't remember which organization, but she went over to Palestine and she saw what was going on, and she worked with people in Palestine to protect them, essentially. And so the Israeli army showed up one day with a bulldozer, intending to demolish that family's house. And they had put up concrete barriers at the end of the road. And Rachel sat on one of those concrete barriers and just sat there. And after a little time, the Israeli soldiers decided they were tired of waiting, and they ran Rachel over with the bulldozer. In the meantime, her parents, Chuck and Cindy, have really jumped on board this whole thing, trying to um, make Rachel's death not in vain, basically. And it was important work that they started, and important work, I think, for us to carry on.
Thank you. Thank you, Terry. All right. So we've got lots of good links coming in the chat. And now we will move to our second presenter, Marcy Mazafredley.
Hello. So my name is Marcy. I'm an MDiv student at Vanderbilt Divinity School. I just finished my second year. And so most of my classes when I reference things or do final projects, I often will talk a lot about Christian Zionism. And I also do a lot of work on Palestinian liberation. And so this is something that I have now decided that I would like to do following my master's with a PhD. So this is stuff that I have been considerably passionate about since I went to Palestine in May of 23. So, oftentimes when we talk about Christian Zionism, there can be a lot of misconception. And there's oftentimes a lot of belief that it's just this one definition. And we know that this is not true. Christian Zionism is something that exists on a spectrum. And so, a book that I often recommend to people is Decolonizing Palestine by Dr. Mitri Reheb. He gives a definition here on the screen of Christian Zionism that focuses on the political Christian lobbying that Christian Zionists do that stretches beyond the traditional mainstream theological arguments that are made for Israel. And so Dr. Reheb states that within this definition, including the biblical and theological constructs of this movement, there's political unfoldings that give broader understanding to the power that Christian Zionists have in modern political discourses. And so, very much what his definition is standing on an ethical stance, defining where this power is shifting. And as this power shifts, is how we begin to understand that it is not just a dispensationalist theology, that there are quieter forms, more subtle or invisible forms of Christian Zionism that exist around us every day. The definition that the United Church of Christ, which is a sibling church to the Disciples of Christ Church, in their response to Christian Zionism, have designated a helpful definition here. It notes the spectrum of views of Christian Zionism and specifically mentions that it is a theological, social, historical, and political set of ideologies. When we discuss Christian Zionism, it's often very easy to look at Christian groups like CUFI, Christians United for Israel, or pastors like Pastor John Hagee, and the end times theology that he often spews, because there's a large financial significance that these groups and individuals have in our politics, but associated with the state of Israel. It is important to know that this dispensationalist and apocalyptic verbiage and theological alliance is not only it's a dangerous form of Christian Zionism, but it's a spectrum that we have to acknowledge that is all dangerous. Dispensationalist Zionism, Christian Zionism, is often also called apocalyptic theology or end times theology. This is the most well known. There's a literal interpretation of prophecy here, believing that the gathering of Jews in Israel, in the modern state of Israel, is necessary to initiate the end times or a second coming of Jesus Christ through the Battle of Armageddon. And so the characteristics of this belief is that during the end times, Jews will have to perish in order for the long-term soul saving of Christians. And so this strongly aligned right-wing belief is in Israeli politics, it's in American right-wing politics, and it often supports the settlements that are illegal in Israel, that are on Palestinian land. We now can see that there are some restorationist Christian Zionist definitions. This stream focuses more on the theology rather than the immediate apocalyptic destruction of the Palestinian land. It believes that God not only is finished with what is happening in Israel, but there's a covenant that was made with Abraham that focuses on God's fulfillment to the Jewish people, and that restoration plan is the land as a sign of divine promise. Pragmatic or political Zionism very much takes a smaller step away from the theology. It's less driven by that specific prophetic timeline, but it very much supports Israel as a fellow democracy. Take that definition and word of democracy as you will in the terms of the state of Israel. But this geopolitical ally in the Middle East, they demand, because of how much we benefit from the state of Israel, must be a defender in civilization.
Marcy, I'm just gonna cut in for a second. Are you changing things on the screen? Because they are not changing in this share.
No,
Okay,
No.
sorry. I was seeing the little arrow.
no, all good.
Okay.
We're going to move on here in a second. Where we naturally shift away from in this understanding is the liberal or subtle Christian Zionism. It's a more recent or academic understanded approach to Christian Zionism and really speaks as it wants to move away from that premillennialism and dispensationalist views. And so dispensationalist is an evangelical theology framework that basically divides history into chunks of time that will share where God's humanity is supposed to be moving towards. And so this belief steps away from that in more of a subtle way, the unspoken things that we'll go over here in the next slide. Here, there's often a fresh perspective that people believe. And so oftentimes people will say, I don't know a lot about what's going on. It's too complicated. All I know is that in the Bible, God gives the land to Jews. That is a version of this subtle, unspoken Christian Zionism that is often untouched or overlooked because people just see it as, oh, that's just an opinion, that they don't know what's going on, but it's further perpetuating what's happening. Here are just some of the examples that I've been studying for the last couple of months of where Christian Zionism really exists and manifests in ways that our sanctuaries don't necessarily view as pertinent, but they're easily identifiable when it comes to language. A huge one is when churches will encourage congregants or denomination representatives to travel to the Holy Land on Christian pilgrimages. But they do the traditional, we're going to walk where Jesus walked journey, right? And so they stay really in Old Jerusalem and the key areas where Jesus practiced his ministry. This is a trip that, as a Christian, I have spent time. I have been there. I've walked where Jesus walked. And yes, it's important for my faith. But also, these pilgrimages specifically that go only for this reason ignore the biggest elephant in the room, and they don't address the living beings of the land that are subjected to treatments as second-class citizens. To walk through the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is not the same as walking through a refugee camp in Jenin or Ramallah in the West Bank and witnessing the firsthand accounts of abuse of the Palestinian people. And so on these trips, it's also important that recognizing language in tour guides or where you see written pamphlets, it's ignoring the historical and modern realities of Palestinian families. And so when you're sitting on a tour bus or in vans, you're not going to be told that the trees outside of your window or in the fields alongside the illegal Israeli settlements are not native trees to the land. They are, in fact, trees that have been imported and placed on top of olive tree farmlands that have been bulldozed over and flattened for the identical Canadian trees that you often see. So that example is very dangerous because it's not understanding what's going on at all. Something that we hear about every Sunday if we go to church is the worship and Bible study language. We all sing the hymns, we all look through the Bible of when we see the word Israel. The Bible says Israel, so it must mean the state of Israel. It is important to note that the nation state of Israel is not the biblical Israel. Ancient Israel was a theocratic monarchy in covenants with God that centered on the Torah, where modern day Israel is making special provisions for Jewish citizenship specifically and draws on Jewish ideals of values. It's still considered a modern secular liberal democracy. Again, take that definition as you will. But it makes no official claims to be the divine covenant that is often expressed in the Torah. And so when we sing the word Israel, it's often easy for us, as we've been programmed, to automatically associate and recognize that, oh, this must mean the nation state of Israel. And we don't question that. When we don't question those things in Bible studies or sermons and songs, it's allowing this misunderstanding to continue. That traditional God blesses those who bless Israel is a traditional belief that Pastor John Hagee has and promotes, that as a Western imperial belief, the United States must support Israel for its own financial gain. That as a quote unquote Christian nation, which is also very dangerous, notion to spread. But as a Christian nation, this is the one thing that we must do in our political sphere, even though politics is supposed to be separated with church and state. There's an individual congregational financial blessing that people will believe that if I just bless Israel, I will be brought back and given fourfold, tenfold. This is the dangerous way of trying to get people who do not have money to not only donate to mega churches, but also to specific Israeli programs that are going directly to the Israeli military. That dispensationalist left behind theology must be noted because sometimes we might not be listening to a preacher from the pulpit give this hellfire brimstone message, but we're also not hearing pastors talk about the dangers of what this means. And so that's something that really has to be spoken about. And the Left Behind series, specifically as a multimedia franchise, is a list of apocalyptic fiction that was written and published between 1995 and up until like the 2007, I believe. But this carries that dispensationalist interpretation of the Bible, specifically Revelation, and believes that the Antichrist instills a new world order that opposes anything that's not a Christian convert, and forces them into believing that without this, you are damned for you're not going to be given eternal salvation. Using that fear automatically then anytime someone talks about the nation state of Israel is immediately going to be met with pushback. Because for my salvation, I have to support Israel, and I've been told that I must support Israel and oppose everything that is a quote unquote enemy to the state of Israel, which continues to conflate and mutually vilifies Muslim people and Arabs as a way of trying to make this possible salvation for us and the people that we care about. Dr. Mitri Rahib is very specific. He also talks about the argument of how we often interchange historical events and biblical events. This is very dangerous. In doing so in the moment, in prayers, people might think that it's not a big deal, but what it's really doing is erasing the Palestinian population altogether. An example of this is when churches or organizations or individuals will refer to the 1967 war in Palestine as the Six-Day War. Instead, it justifies the tragedies and the loss of Palestinian homes as a biblical reference. This is to co-align the creation of the world, where God completed the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. It's supposed to align the same with Israel's creation, that it happened in 6 days during this war, and therefore that is aligned with God's timeline. Naming or referencing Palestinian villages as their Hebrew names from the Bible, but not their physical names as Palestinian state, is using that language dispossesses the land that has belonged to Palestinians for generations. Many Arabic places and names are specifically and systematically renamed in Hebrew, not only during the Nakba in 1948, but has continued to be a placeholder for collective memory now. So there's actually a really cool map that is interactive that we'll share at the end, by Al Jazeera. It's an interactive map that actually shows you the exact historical lineages, and the way that names have been changed for these villages. And the last one here on this example is that our administration and all the Christian nationalists and self-identified Christian Zionists of its leadership continue to say that they are diehard allies for the state of Israel. This is not only evident in their creation of policy and marginalized misunderstanding, but it's also existent in their militarized support in forms of weaponry and facial recognition software that we believe is a legislative example for how we support the state of Israel. There is an important understanding here that there are clear prayers that are used by our leaders to not only support these things, but also change the name in the ways that God is trying to supposedly support the massacre of people. This is consistent with that promised land of Canaan that we've all heard about significantly in the Bible. That narrative is dangerous, it's complex, but it is erasing an entire generation, entire generations of people. And last but not least here, we're going to talk about the ethical and theological compartmentalization. Here is where I really tell people that we have to recognize the dangers in our language. When we say, well, Jesus wasn't Palestinian, or if we believe that whitewashed images of Jesus are his true identity, we're ignoring a Christ that was a brown-skinned individual who was executed by a political regime, an empire, and occupation for preaching the gospel of love, because that was against the powers and the beliefs of that empire. When we continue to erase Jesus's Palestinian existence, we're doing that to every single Palestinian that is there and that it lives across the world. We say that we're Christians and we desire to fight for the meek and the displaced, but yet we ignore the significant values and standing in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And so these are some of those more quiet examples that we talk about when we don't question our beliefs because they contradict some of those things that our faith communities have been told, well, this is what we believe. This is how we're supposed to practice what we believe. When really, we're just afraid to question the indoctrination and the programming that we have been forced to recognize, telling us that this is what we must do. It's a version of idolatry worship, as we've abandoned this idea of praising a Jesus when we've started to praise a nation state. So it's very important in our language and the ways that we say we are anti-Zion, anti-Christian Zionist, or that we stand up for the people of Palestine, but we also must do that in our actions as well. And so that does include how we speak in worship, that does include how we talk about the history of Palestine, and that does include how we pray for the people of Palestine. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Marcy. We are going to move into small groups now. And I am gonna take those questions. Marcy, do you want to put those questions up one more time?
Yeah.
I am going to copy them into the chat, but also you will have I'm never sure if the chat will arrive in your small group or not, because sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. But so we are going to break into groups now of about 4 people. And so yeah, we'll start with just brief introductions. Part of our goal as Disciples Palestine Solidarity Movement is to build community across the disciples, so that we can know each other and share resources and share information and projects. So, all right, well, we are basically ready to wrap up. Is there anything burning from your small group conversation that you really need the rest of us to hear? Because I would love to hear that if there was something so revelatory that we all need to know it. Okay, I've built the standards up too high.
No, you have an educated group.
Okay, well, I think that's probably the case. So I am very grateful that all of you are here, and we do want to wrap up on time. So we just, Marcy, you can be ready to pop some links in the chat. One of the things that we wanted to draw your attention to on this topic specifically is that if you've watched any of our prayer videos, which I would love it if you would pray with our prayer videos, we record the weekly wave of prayer from Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center every week, and that video is posted on our YouTube channel and our Facebook page and our Instagram. And Sabeel it's the Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center in East Jerusalem. And around the world, there are organizations in other countries that are what is known as Friends of Sabeel. And for us, that is Friends of Sabeel North America, also known as FASNA. And FASNA has put out a fantastic new resource. And I believe the title is The Bible is Anti-Zionist, which is probably a revelation for many of the people we know, many of the folks in our congregations. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. It's a series of, I think, 40 some reflections on that, and fabulous resource, could be used in a wide variety of ways. So we wanted to particularly lift up that. Marcy has also been working on a resource list. And I should open the chat so I know what you've put up in there. You already put the resource list. The first link, yes, is the resource list. Okay. That is a resource list that we may, Terry, I might have you go in and add in your things to the list that Marcy filled out there, because I'm sure there will be overlap. But so there are a couple of things there. So those are things we wanted to draw your attention to. We do want to give you a save the date. We will be gathering as Disciples Palestine Solidarity Movement again in August on, I believe it's the last Sunday. So Sunday, August 30th. And our plan at the moment is to have that gathering be an educational session on the apartheid-free congregation / apartheid-free community movement. We have at least one person here from an apartheid-free congregation that is Heart of the Rockies Christian Church in Colorado. Um, and so we're going to learn more about that and what that looks like and how that works. We have another apartheid-free congregation in the upper Midwest in Des Moines. Downtown Disciples in Des Moines are now an apartheid-free congregation. And I believe there's one in Georgia, Lyle. So, but I haven't succeeded yet in getting them to email me back. So we don't know if we will have them or not, or what the status of that is with that Amplify Christian Church down in the Georgia region. So that will be our next gathering. I do, Marcy, I don't know if you had noticed, but Beth had dropped a question in the chat for you. Beth, is this still a question, or I don't know which group you were in, if you had a chance to talk about it there?
We talked about it, but it is still a question in terms of, is this a more dominant movement within the political life of Israel? And, is it becoming more a part of the central, because it used to be somewhat of kind of the fringe understanding. These were seen as extremes, but, it seems to be bandied about more.
Yes.
Okay.
I would definitely say it's more of the dominant force. And I think it's important to recognize here too that when we talk about the different forms, that this is not something that every Israeli Jew believes, but the government of Israel, yes.
I would say the same thing has happened in our country, right? Like, not
Yes.
most Christians are not revisionist Zionists or dispensationalist Zionists, but the ones that got elected that are in charge now are at the very far extreme of that spectrum. And that's like it's forcing itself into the mainstream because our ambassador to Israel, Reverend Mike Huckabee, is over there using Judea and Samaria language.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, because it
Because
very
they're
much,
in power doesn't mean they're not still extremists.
right, right. And I think, especially when it comes to the question of how the government will continue to add settlements versus it's just going to be completely leveled and introduced as a full statehood is really that plan.
Well, as you were talking, Marcy, I mean, it came to my mind about how when we've been talking about what's happening with the United States and Iran,
Mhm.
it keeps coming back to support of Israel, support of Israel, support of Israel. And
Right,
then, the revisionist Zionism says, and Israel should include all of Iran. So
right.
that's, yeah,
The greater Israel, yes.
yes.
Yeah, yeah. Barry, I see that you
Very,
have a
yeah.
hand raised.
Yes, first an apology that I joined the call late. Was able to be in the chat room, and that's got me all excited about what you all are doing and planning and what you've already done. My wife and I are in the Greater Kansas City Overland Park area, part of the country. Pastor Laura Phillips, I don't know how many of you have the joy of knowing her and working with her. She got to know my wife and myself very well. We're converts to Christianity in recent years from Judaism, and I've gotten very involved with Seville. I'm on their speakers bureau. They have some videos that I've done with them, which are accessible via the internet, and just to be able to have our eyes opened. What I mentioned in the chat, and I'll be very quick about this, is that my wife and I are both professional educators in different ways, different areas. I'm a former seminary instructor where I have taught Old Testament to Christian folk who are either pursuing ordination or some at an earlier point at an undergraduate level. So my wife and I really had to figure out how to redirect our spiritual lives because it came to a point where we just were not comfortable the way that we previously had been for decades, going into a synagogue with the leaders of the synagogue, whether they be ordained or lay leaders, seem not to be aware of the bigger picture that they're trying to direct people toward and influence them on. So I could go deeper on that with trainings that I've had the pleasure of doing. other trainings that I participated in. Also, earlier in my life, last thing I'll say, I'm a little bit taking too much time, and I apologize for that. I also have a significant level of dialogue with leaders in the United States government, including presidents, one of whom actually was a president at the time when I had some interactions with him. And the same for what's going on in Israel. I've met several of the prime ministers over the years. I was also present at one time some years ago with Bibi Netanyahu. I'll save that for another occasion as to how that conversation went or didn't go. But yeah, for my wife and myself, both our hearts are in this, our minds are in this. We're reaching out to help all the time in special ways that we might be able to fill a void. Not that we're so, I'll speak for myself, not that I'm so great, okay? But I've just been fortunate to have the experiences that I've had and be able to put these things together the way that we have now into our faith lives and our spiritual lives.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for being with us, Barry. And it's great to hear that you have that wealth of experience. And if you got in here, we have your email, so we will be in touch. So
Fantastic. I'm also in contact with the UCC because they're
perfect.
doing
Yeah,
great work in this
they
area as well.
are.
They don't know me personally at this point. I've been busy with other organizations' projects, but I'm always looking forward to meeting
Sure.
people
Sure.
who have good hearts and good minds.
Yeah, I will encourage all of you. I hope you're already following Disciples Palestine Solidarity Movement on social media. If you're not, definitely go find us. But you should also be following the UCC's Movement for Palestine or something like that. We took out all the prepositions and made it shorter after because they made theirs first, and we were like, we can make that shorter, so we did. But yeah, definitely look up the UCC's as well because as you know. We share Peter McCary, who is our last guest for this with the UCC. He actually is UCC, but we call him a disciple when he hangs out with us because all of that work through Global Ministries is shared. So I think that is all we have for you today.
I've also been in contact personally with Reverend William Barber, and he
Oh,
is
good.
such a wealth of a person and just a professional, and he's just so outstanding that definitely is a huge plus, along with other pluses
Absolutely.
that disciples have.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you again to all of you. Thank you to Terry and Marcy, our speakers. Y'all are doing such good work. And, we've got all the way from Calvin to now. So that was a lot to cover in those very short presentations. And I learned things. So fantastic. I appreciate it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. And I hope you will be able to join us again on August 30th. And in the meantime, pray with us when we post those videos, share them. We would love to have a broader audience. And that prayer practice is one of our disciplines to stay focused on amplifying the voices of our Palestinian Christian siblings. One of the things you heard us say today is that one of the things Christian Zionism does is it makes Palestinian Christians invisible. So part of what we're all always trying to do is remind the world that they are still there and they are still faithful and they are still praying for all the folks. I love, if you've watched one of those videos, every single one of those videos of those prayers ends with the weekly prayer partners from the World Council of Churches for whatever 4 or 5 countries around the world we're praying for this week. So there is much we can continue to learn from the faithful witness of our Palestinian Christian siblings. All right. Thank you so much.